is first you've got to be efficient. And then once you get to that point, then you're like, I can scale this out and I can make even more money. I can be more profitable. And now I can have a bigger vacation.
So maximizing efficiency is the start. You don't want to scale an inefficient process, right?
What's holding you back from starting or growing your business into what it can be? Well, if you're listening to this, it's not a lack of information. What you're about to hear is all you need to get motivated and start making waves. Do It for a Living podcast details the journey of today's true players in their own words. Find out how they broke out so you can too. The time is now. The time is always now.
Welcome back to another episode of Do It for a Living. I'm Kevin Dubois. Before I get started, I wanted to let everybody know that we have a new addition to a feature we had in MSA that allowed you to basically put a form on your website. And this new addition is actually integrating something called JotForm, which is a form builder, which you can embed directly on your website. And then we have connected that JotForm directly into the MSA system. So if you are, for example, if you do like shock rebuilding, or if you do turbo rebuilding or transmission rebuilding, where people mail you stuff often, you can put that form on your website that they fill out. And once they have submitted the form, it just appears as a job directly in your MSA with all the contact information filled out, all the vehicle information filled out, whatever notes that you put in the form all appear in the notes on the job. So it makes it super easy to make that stuff directly into your system, which you can then export to QuickBooks or send them a bill or work the job and track time on it. So really awesome integration. It kind of updates the web form we had that we made within our own system. But this one works quite a bit better because JotForm allows you to really customize that form rather than just using a canned form that we offered. So check it out. I will make a video for it here. You should see it in the next day or two on our YouTube channel. But YouTube, just My Shop Assist, and you'll see all the videos we've made. So yeah, this is a JotForm integration to your website that syncs with My Shop Assist. So this week we have Richard Fielder, who has been a business partner with me in Evolution Dynamics for about 15 years. We've worked together that whole time, and he does most of the Evo 10s, the tuning, basic installs, and that sort of stuff. And he does a lot of the product design. And so we're going to get his background in this episode, and then moving forward, we're going to bring him onto the podcast as a co-host in kind of a roundtable discussions between me and him and other guests. And then we got a lot of different topics we can talk about that help us grow the business or decide what to do with the business. And I think listening in on that stuff will be very helpful to other people within your own business. So without further ado, we have Richard Fielder with us. All right, I'm here with Richard Fielder, and he's been my business partner at Evolution Dynamics for probably 15 years. So Richard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So Richard, let's go ahead and get started. We want to... me and you have talked about this, but bringing you on as like a second host to the show and doing interviews locally and making it more of a roundtable rather than always just a one-on-one conversation. And before we start doing that, I really wanted to introduce you and who you are. So why don't you go ahead and give us a background of, your education, your training, your history, kind of like how you got involved in cars, and kind of bring us up to how you got involved with Evolution Dynamics.
All right. So originally I started with cars with my dad. So he did four-wheel drive stuff, Jeeps, pickups, all that kind of stuff. You're growing up. That was what you did out in West Texas. So had a lot of experience just wrenching on those, doing small upgrades, shocks, engine rebuilds, carburetors, all that kind of good stuff. The languages I don't speak anymore. Hardly any of us speak those anymore. I then started to go to college at UTA, University of Texas in Arlington. I got involved with the Formula SAE group, where I met Kevin, met a bunch of other fellow students at that time, and we formed a pretty good network. That's really where I started getting into cars a lot more. About that same time, I had bought a Volkswagen Jetta turbo car, and I wanted to start modifying it, do some things to it, and talk to a mutual friend that Kevin and I had, and he said, "No, man, you don't want a Volkswagen. You want to buy Evo. Evo is where it's at, man." So he's like, "You can tune them a lot easier, and you can work on them and make a lot of power. They're reliable, and list goes on." So tried to modify my Volkswagen. Had very limited success, mostly because the barrier of entry to purchase the software to tune it was way more than my college job could handle. My budget was not able to handle that. So I had that car for another year, I guess, while I was messing around with it. Then Kevin took me for a ride in his white Evo 8. And then after that, I was like, man, what am I doing with these four-wheel drive cars? I need one of these sweet all-wheel drive cars.
And this had to have been around the 2005, 2006 time frame, because that's when I was an FSAE as well. So that's where we were talking about. So
Right. So I sold that car, and I bought a 2008 Evo 10, which within the first 150 miles of that car, I'd already pulled the manifold off. I was porting it, already had done some basic tuning to it, and that car had many modifications over the years. And that where I started getting more involved with Evolution Dynamics. So Kevin approached me, and he's like, hey, we've been working in my garage for a while. HOA kicked us out, so we need to either close up shop or we need to just go all the way. So at that point, we rented our first shop. It was, 1,200 square feet?
yeah,
Maybe.
way too small.
Way too small. And-
within like a month, we had it full already. I mean, it was like 1,200 is not enough to do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So our first big worry is, holy crap, can we make rent? How are we going to afford all these bills that we have? Because working in a garage, you don't have any bills, and all you have is the HOA breathing down your neck at 3 a.m. when you're trying to get a car running. So that was our first hurdle, was making rent the first month. Well, we come to find out that really wasn't much of a hurdle. Within 3 or 4 months, we had already rented the next door shop, and then we rented the next door shop after that. So we grew by a factor of 3 within the first 6 months to a year. So
we just cut a hole through the wall.
Yes, literally
Between
with
the
the Sawzall. So that's where it all kind of started. And I learned to tune on my personal Evo 10. I probably flashed that ECU 400 or 500 times in the life of that car. Learning what all the tables did, learning how they worked, how you needed to change the values in order for it to respond like you wanted it to. So, and honestly, back then we didn't have a lot of definition on those tables, so it was a challenge to try to figure out what they did and how they worked.
Yeah, the early ones tuning them, there was lots of problems with the load tables. I remember customers, when we started trying other customers' cars, if they were a little bit higher boosts than what you tuned it for, they were all pissed off, and that was a really long process of figuring out how to configure the load tables so that way it didn't get mad and didn't throw check engine lights at the customer. And that's probably 3/4 of your 500 flashes, if I imagine,
Yes,
right?
yes. And then the whole complication of the MR with the automatic made that even exponentially worse, because then you had to deal with all the same things, but also for the transmission. So it was a lot of learning in the first 4 or 5 years, learning all the best ways to do it. Not only that, but Kevin and I did a lot of the School of Hard Knocks when running a business right from the start, where you didn't know what to do. You don't know how to hire employees. You don't know how to fire employees. You don't know when to grow, how to grow. We're just winging it, man.
And so you were doing a day job as well. If I remember correctly, you started with, was it Tesmec? Is that where you started?
Yep.
How did you start with them, and how did that work with college?
So they were an off-road or off-highway construction equipment manufacturer. They were based in South Arlington, Mansfield, actually. And they built trenching equipment. So we would do anything from 300 horsepower all the way up to about 1,500 horsepower. Diesel engine, very slow-moving, tracked vehicles with basically picture a bulldozer with a chainsaw, like a wood-cutting chainsaw attached to the back of it.
Yeah.
So they actually helped me pay for my education. I think I kind of skipped ahead with my education there, but I'm a mechanical engineer from UTA, and they paid for pieces of my tuition, like a reimbursement type of arrangement. And then I was learning a lot of mechanical design during that time, a lot of manufacturing with plant floor stuff, because not only did we design our product, but we also built it in our own factory in Mansfield. We were the only location in America. They had also run a whole bunch of factory stuff out of a parent company out of Italy. So a lot of experience with dealing with offshore resources and coordinating with other engineering firms or other engineering groups and all of that. So
you held that job without a degree then, initially? Okay.
Yes.
So you were as an engineer by practice, but not by degree.
Yes, during that time, yeah. So I was in engineering school while I was doing all of that stuff with them. Okay. I started there sweeping the floor after school. So I was junior in high school. And after school, I would sweep the floor. I'd do parts runs, just basic forklift driving. That's where I got my sweet forklift skills. And then started moving up towards engineering as I was in engineering school. I then graduated while I worked for them. I graduated right before basically coming into the FSE, right during the FSE program, and then into Evolution Dynamics. So,
okay. And then, so you've got a mechanical engineering degree. You bought the Evo, started tuning it, and that really kind of transitioned you into working with us at the shop. And so your role at Evolution Dynamics has largely been handling the Evo 10 stuff, right? So go ahead and explain like how you used your own car to, work on other people's cars rather than testing on other people's cars, right?
Right. So that's really the best way to test is, you start on your own car, started tuning on my own car. And like you had said earlier, 75% of the hard part of tuning that car is the drivability or the low load, the cruising and idling pieces of that tune. Or pieces of that programming. So like I said earlier, did a million flashes on that car, learning how to do with that, trying not to do all of the techniques on a customer car, because if you break it or you hurt it, then as a business, you have to own up to that mistake, and you have to either fix the customer's car or repair it or replace it or whatever that the customer is demanding. So that became a hard thing. So during the course of my car, I had spun a bearing. That's where we learned the value of a properly designed surge tank when road racing.
Oh, yeah.
I melted a piston when I was at Eagles Canyon during a race weekend or an event weekend because I went really lean when I did a hard left-hand corner, and the Evo hates hard left-handers when you don't have a proper surge tank. So that was my first engine swap on my personal car. Learned a lot about properly building the head. The Evo 10 has a variable valve timing on the head on both the exhaust and the intake. The older generation just had it on the intake, but we found out when you use really, really heavy springs and you don't take care of the exhaust cam properly that you don't get proper oil pressure and you tend to spin bearings. So learned a lot on that as well. So we learned a little better techniques of how to build heads. Don't go too far into the race pieces of or race components, parts, and trying to balance the street ability versus how to drive it on the track. So,
and Magnus actually came in shortly there. I mean, we knew this was a problem for a while, and then Magnus came out with his Myvic Delete, which solved all of our problems that we had been dealing with for essentially years at that point, where we would just tell people not to use heavy valve springs for street cars because they just wouldn't idle, right? That was the issue you kept running into?
Yep, right. And the low idle would make the oil pressure drop, and then the bearings would start to hate that, of course. And so that was always a struggle. And, when you first start tuning these things and modifying them from the beginning, the aftermarket and all the other shops are learning all this at the same time. So people like Magnus, a lot of the other manufacturers that we work with, ETS, people like that, they're evolving at the same time we are. So they're providing a new part, and then we are having to learn their new part on a new platform to make sure that we make it perform properly, which has always been the struggle. But now that platform is mature, a lot of the aftermarket is in place, and we know exactly what to do. We know exactly the parts. We know exactly customer comes in, I want to make X amount of horsepower. Here's all the stuff you need. This is basically blueprinted. Here's the how much it's going to cost. Here's all the power that you can make, and it'll run like it's supposed to all the time.
And it's amazing to think that, like, we've got essentially 20 years of experience on this one platform only, just doing one platform. And then you think of how much more challenging it is for a shop to do lots of different types of platforms and say, hey, I'm going to work on an R32 and build somebody's engine and do all this sort of stuff, or your Volkswagen. And that really makes you wonder, like, the expertise level of a person if they don't do a single vehicle regularly or often and understand what works and what does not work. And even if you know the parts from, like reading it on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, that does not mean you have experience with it road racing and drag racing, and you have 50 different customer cars that you've tested it on to make sure it works exactly how you want it to work. And so the experience we've gathered from, or rather you have gathered from the Evo 10 has really been, like next level depth, understanding the platform to develop products now. And so you mentioned the surge tank. So that was something, your expertise and background is really in like product design and development, right? And so explain how you designed that surge tank and how you determined it was a problem.
Well, a lot of that came from just track experience. So we had a few customers that were really into NASA racing back in the day, and they were always complaining that when they had less than a half a tank of fuel and they do specific turns, especially on elevation changes, they would get fuel cut really bad. And at first we thought it was some flukes, and it's like, okay, well, what's going on? And is that exactly what you're experiencing? Was it something else? So that's when you start your product testing on your own vehicles. We did some research, we did some fuel pressure logging, and we were able to pinpoint exactly the forces that it took in order for the fuel pressure to get to lose. So we sat down, looked at the design, we looked at what other people were doing and seeing, is anybody making a surge tank? We had some surge tank background on an Evo 8 that we had built, basically the 3 version, yes, ahead of our Pikes Peak car that we had. And so we looked at how that design was, and we knew we had to make it better. We needed to make it packaged nicely behind the trunk. You need to make it as safe as you can, because if stuff starts to leak or you start having problems, especially on a street-driven car, you don't want to have fuel in your trunk or in your back seat or wherever it is. So you need to design the thing as best you can. So we started developing a tank that was installed in a very specific spot. We did some calculations based on, a max fuel burn of 1 minute with the biggest possible injector that was available at the time, which was a 2,000 cc injector. So we did some math and figured out what the volume needed to be after that. So we packaged everything up, and funny thing, we bought some hoses that we thought were going to be the right hoses because they weren't too expensive, and there's a place on the street that would supply them. But they were so hard to put together. I remember some of our contractors would come in, and they'd have blisters on their fingers and like 4 hoses in. So that's one of those things where we're trying to save the customer some money by doing something a little inexpensive or a very cost-effective way. And you end up just buying the proper race hose, and you do it. It costs a little more money, but in the end, it's much easier to install, and it's much better supported. So went through all that design. We did some direct product testing. So I bolted one on my personal car, went out to Eagles Canyon, which is another local track out here, did a bunch of track testing, and it worked flawlessly. You could drain that tank all the way down to the gas light was on, and you never had a problem. So you no longer needed to keep your tank completely full. We even noticed if you had some really sticky tires or some stickered tires on the 5th lap, you were already getting fuel cut on a fuel tank of fuel. So it depended on how hard you pushed it and how hard you're wanting to drive that lap as to when you first got your first fuel cut. So that whole process was a learning experience. We learned how to research, how to design, how to package, how to pick the proper components, and then how to install it. And then after you do all of that, if you want to sell these through your web store, then you get to learn about marketing and you get to learn about writing instructions of how to install it in your car. And you get to learn about pricing it competitively with all the other 500 people that are now making something very similar to you. So it's a whole learning experience when you're running a shop like that and you're doing product development at the same time.
And that's something I think we messed up pretty bad early on. Was the product was good, I think the initial version you put together a bill of materials for it, but we priced it way too low, and then we made it way too, I guess, variable. You could say, hey, I want 2 Bosch 044 pumps or 2 external Walbro 255 pumps or one or the other, and that really made it really hard to price it out because everybody was getting something different. And ultimately, the first revision of that thing, I don't think we made hardly any money on, and probably lost money on some of the more elaborate setups where you have Ys and you're splitting them and running into a Dash 8 all the way to the fuel rail or not to the fuel rail, and just too much variability in it, right? And so that's kind of like a lesson learned with the product development is you got to really kind of keep it simple and not add all that variability to it. And that's leads us into the revision we have now on the site is you drew a new tank, and I believe you drew these in SolidWorks, right? Or
Yeah, it was SolidWorks.
And so you drew the tank in SolidWorks, and we now have like billet end caps with all the ports you need for any configuration, rather than having to weld different tanks for different configurations. And so you've kind of learned as we go how to make this product better and better. And so the current iteration is the best one, and we don't have to worry about a lot of the rework of any products. It's just ready to go depending on what configuration. And we limit the configurations to basically 1 or 2 pumps, and that's it, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so moving on from that one, you are also working full-time at Peterbilt now, right? So at some point in time, you got a job with them, and explain what you do there, and how does that help what you do here?
So I work at Peterbilt. I am the manufacturing engineering manager, so I'm in charge of all the engineering of the tools that build the trucks. So any type of manipulator or robot or whatever it is, all goes through my department one way or another. So having a position like that while you are running a shop and designing components, it really helps you understand like the big scheme of things. And it helps you understand what your goals are, and it helps you understand how to communicate better. So as most engineers are when you first start, you're terrible at talking. Like you're trying to sell something to some guy and he's like, I don't even know what you're trying to say. Just because engineers like to make it really technical, and they like to, they struggle to speak, common language to someone that may not know how technical that the subject actually is. So it's taught a lot. It's learned a lot about communication and how to communicate with someone that may not understand even what they're buying. A customer comes in and they're wanting to do a build, or they're wanting to purchase like a particular component. Well, having that better form of communication helps you sell the pieces, sell the components, or sell your service in the end. So it also helps you streamline your process, which is kind of an underlying thing that we started out with the MSA product, was to understand the efficiencies in your shop. So a major component of being in manufacturing, you're trying to be as efficient as possible. So you start using some Six Sigma tools, you use some design tools, you use all kinds of different ways to define workflows and even like interactions, or how many moves that it takes in order for you to grab your wrench, walk over to the car, install your component, and then put it back in your toolbox. Well, Kevin and I started, and our toolboxes were a ratty mess, and there were sockets everywhere, and none of the drawers had any kind of organization. Well, as a part of being on an operating assembly line, you learn how they organize tools line side, and you have shadow boards, and you have only the tools that you need. There's not a lot of parts line side. They've got parts in kits, or they got parts in tubs, or however it needs to be. So all those techniques that a major assembly line like that would use in manufacturing, we adapted a lot of that to our shop processes. So we went from being extremely inefficient and working 80, 90 hours a week and never getting a break to being much more efficient. Not only that, but we also learned how to calculate our efficiency using some of the tools that we had learned and that I had pulled out of Peterbilt, and it started making more sense. And so you start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel much more clearly when you understand your goal and you understand where you want your business to be as a whole. Yeah,
and if people have followed us on YouTube at all, there are some videos that we put together from, I don't know, they're probably pretty old now, maybe 10 years old. And that what Richard's talking about with like the number of steps it takes to go pick up a wrench and work on something. And around that same time is when we implemented our shadow board, or our it's called the shadow board, I think, right? So within our toolboxes, and especially the engine room, and we did exactly what Richard said they do at the manufacturing facility, is remove all the tools that you don't use and only put the stuff you do use to build an engine, and put it in your board inside a drawer, and then when you're ready to build a particular engine, you pull that one drawer open, and you have all the tools right in front of you, right there. And so we made videos on actually doing that, and so that's kind of the background of where we came to this decision of doing that for engine building, and it's been great. The only thing that has changed over the years is the shadow foam we used eventually degrades and starts coming apart if you use it often enough, and so at this point I probably need a whole new roll box. Snap-on roll box is so beat up, but yeah, that's really the only thing that is. You kind of have to make adjustments throughout the years. Like, sure, you need to add a wrench here or there and make adjustments to your process. But I think that's part of what you do at Peterbilt, too. You do make adjustments as you go.
And more importantly, you always know when your wrench is missing. You can look in your shadow board and go, oh, I'm missing my hammer, or I'm missing my pliers or whatever, and then you know exactly, say, hey, oh yeah, I left it over there, so I need to repopulate that. So that also helps your efficiency when you're looking for tools. You know exactly what's missing.
Yeah, and in the aerospace industry, they call that FOD, fight FOD. So if you can't find your tool, it's somewhere in a plane, and that plane can't leave your garage or your hangar until you find the tool. And they actually use, I think, electronic toolboxes now, where it's like if you pull a tool out. You can't lock the toolbox, or you can't check the plane out, I believe, until all the tools are in there, and it uses cameras or some kind of sensor or some kind of magnet or something to detect that all the tools are in place, and then you can shut the door. It's pretty awesome to see that, but you can't imagine how much that would cost to do at a installer level. The toolboxes probably cost as much as a dyno. But yeah, one thing is great about having somebody like Richard with me here at the shop, and so I'm here full time and he's here part time. But what's great about it is when you have somebody who's enthusiastic about what you do as a team, and they come in, whatever evening he comes in, and if you have an idea, we just bounce ideas off each other. And we do this all the time. And I can't say enough about how valuable that is to have somebody with a passion for what you're doing and the understanding of how it all works, and is willing to kind of go down the brainstorm paths of trying new things. And we just kind of talked about ways to improve efficiency inside of the shop. But this is something we've talked about outside of this podcast as well, is growing the business and actually scaling it to make it essentially more profitable. So let's make this kind of our focus topic for this podcast, is scalability. Kind of what is it? How do you do it? So what is scalability to you? What do you think? And we'll have this a two-way discussion too. So what do you think scalability is?
So I think scalability is when you want to expand your business, or you want to pull your business into a direction that will increase your profit and increase your cash flow. So say you're installing parts, or you're doing service on cars. And then you just start selling people's parts, like custom parts or whatever. And so you scaled it a little bit. You've gone from installing parts that somebody's brought you to now you're installing parts that you're providing yourself. So you've got another smaller, but it's a stream of revenue. And then you scale it up to where well, I can make parts better than this. So I'm going to design the part, manufacture it, and then I'll install it myself and or sell it to the public, either through a web store or direct or however you want to do it. So you've scaled your business from service to installing other people's parts to installing parts that you have designed and manufactured yourself. So you've now increased your profit and your cash flow by a large factor. And the last one's probably the bigger one that has the most amount of profit. So the real question that we have, making your own parts. So the real question becomes, how do you scale past that? As in an automotive industry, performance automotive specifically, once you start making your own parts, then what's the next step? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, and I think this is a really hard question to answer, because we talk about it a lot, and I agree that growing the business is essentially scaling it, but the question is, what is actually scalable in our business, right? So service itself is very hard to scale, because you can't just immediately double your output with the same person, right? You essentially have to hire more people, which means you have to make that position, your technician position, you have to make it defined enough where you can just hire another person, cut and paste them, put them on another lift. but then you need a bigger space. So your resources grow in proportion to the people you add, right? So the resources you need grow in proportion to the people you have. So while it is scalable in that you can do more work with more people, I feel like it's not nearly as scalable as like your web store where you can just post a web page up and then start selling, $10,000 parts the first month, then you're up to $100,000 of parts a month the next year, and then you're $1 million of parts eventually, right? So that's really scalable too, but even that requires, a shipping and receiving department, and then you're going to need more people handling phone orders. And so there's a lot to it that is like, what is scalable and what can't be scaled? So in our business, I think you nailed it, was the service is something that you can grow. And, selling other people's parts on top of parts you're already working on and through the website, and then manufacturing. So are those the three scalable things, or do we got more than that?
Oh, I think there's more than that. At least, well, in specifically where you've got your automotive, your business. I mean, you talk about other businesses all day long, like we were talking about Starbucks, or we were talking about, some other type of sales. But, specifically with automotive business, it's I don't know. It's hard.
Well, let's break this down. So, tuning a car, it is a highly specialized skill you learn, right?
Right.
And so, at least how we do it, we have to have the car in front of us. We don't do email tunes. So we get the car in front of us, you put it on the dyno, and you start doing actual data logs, and you do, pulls. So like, you have to physically tune each car individually each car. So that is not at all scalable, right? If you want to tune more cars, you just have to spend more time doing it.
More hours.
But the act of tuning a car has been scaled by people. Like, so Cobb Tuning, for example, makes a off-the-shelf tune for Evos that you can buy a tune for your Evo, and it's essentially tuned. I mean, it may not be the greatest tune, but it's good enough, right? And I mean, they've sold probably hundreds of thousands of those things, if not millions of them. So that is you can scale it, I guess, right? So what else has been scaled in our industry? I mean, like, mostly I can think of as manufacturing, but do you know of anybody that I know? National Speed tried scaling the shop model, right? So
you buy a template from them.
I think they were just owning their own. We could call Jordan again and talk to him again about it. But I know for sure they had a starter store, their first one, and then they were going to open up a second one, and I think they did get a second one open, but I don't know if they've ever got past that. And in his original podcast, he talked about growing it nationwide, and maybe that was the goal, but I don't think they ever got there. So we need to follow up with him. But there are other businesses that have scaled. Car Toys, as an example, is a car stereo shop. There's, I don't know, maybe 50 or 100 of them throughout the kind of central western states. They've scaled car stereo install and sales. They don't, as far as they don't make their own product, but I've not been in there enough to check. There's some other like off-road trucks, like 4-wheel parts. There was a bunch of those stores, and
they do make some of their own parts.
Yeah, they do. Whether they're branded or they're actually theirs, I don't know the answer to that. But certainly, they scaled the lifted truck in, whatever accessory store that it is. Why is that not a thing with performance shops? I mean, like, what are we doing different that we can't do it? Is it too specialized?
Yeah, or maybe it's a regional thing. Maybe like in certain areas, you've always got the same, maybe you have an all-wheel drive shop, or you've got a small engine turbo shop, or you've got a Mustang Camaro shop. I think that a lot of times it may not be a nationwide market, but I would think that, you got V8s all over the place. You got Turbo 4s all over the place. So, whenever we were toying with the EcoBoost thing a while back when we were starting to learn that engine, there's got to be a way you could scale that, or you could transplant that from market to market through different cities, through different areas.
Okay, let's just run this through our head. Let's run an example. If you wanted to scale a shop, the hardest parts of the shop are finding the technicians, the people doing it.
Yes,
but the structure of the business essentially has to be exactly the same for all businesses. Like they all have to register with a federal EIN number. You need a Secretary of State registration to pay sales tax. You need to pay business taxes. Like we have personal property tax and we have franchise tax and we got sales tax. You pay all these different taxes, and then what else of the business? I mean, you essentially can do what we're talking about is like a franchise model, essentially, where you're just kind of like everything you need to do a business, you need to kind of bundle it together and then distribute to everybody that wants to do it, right? And I feel like most of that stuff is fairly easy to do, but there's definitely not anything that does it. Even still, there's things that I did not know about running a business. Like, for example, we just got hit with it's not an EPA request, it's a city environmental protection request. So apparently some business in our complex dumped oil down the drain. And so now they audited every business in the, I guess, vicinity to see who is the one dumping oil down the drain. And so they were cleaning out the sewers and saw it, and now I have to fill out a form. And there's all kinds of questions on there I didn't even know the answer to, because they're like, do you have oil traps on your building? I'm like, I'm not a general repair shop, so like these are questions I do not know. We don't do we're not like a oil change shop. We don't do that kind of stuff. But
and we capture our oil, by the way. We don't dump it.
Yeah, I mean, we have a 250 gallon tote, and so
right.
That was a question on the questionnaire that I was able to answer because I knew and I have receipts from the people that come and pick it up every 6 months or however often they come by. But yeah, I mean, like this is stuff that you don't know until you have a problem with it, and then it's a problem, right?
Right.
But all of this stuff cannot all be bundled together for everybody who's running a business, so you don't have to guess. Like with MSA, at least, our biggest problem is onboarding people because everybody does everything slightly different as far as how they run the shop and what they call, like, you know, what services you offer and what you name them and what parts you sell. And so the MSA problem is when you sign up, the system is blank. And if you run a restoration shop, I don't know what tasks you want to call them. If you run a transmission rebuilding shop, I don't know what you want to call your tasks. But I mean, we can make templates for this to make it so when you sign up with the software that, boom, I build transmissions, and then boom, you start off with a task list of all that stuff. Does that make it more scalable if you're trying to start a business and you sign up for MSA, you get your QuickBooks for your accounting side, but this still kind of misses some of the like business creation questions of like...
Yeah, and I think a lot of that kind of comes into, when you start a business in our industry, you're an enthusiast first.
Yeah.
And so you are most probably 90% of the time, you're not a business person. You do not have an MBA. You don't have the schooling and all the things that you need. You're an enthusiast that said, I can market my skill. I can make some money on this passion that I have. And so once you get into that, you kind of realize, like we did, the School of Hard Knocks, with how to run your business, how to make it more efficient, all these things that we've been talking about this entire podcast. So I think that because a lot of the people that come into the, MSA or the QuickBooks, and they don't have any idea how they should be doing it because they just run it like they would a blank piece of paper. So, you look at some guy's QuickBooks and he's got one part and one task, and he types every single part into this one task and fills out every single piece of paper and is very inefficient about it, and usually has to hire somebody to handle that for him because he's so inefficient with it.
Yeah, and so that's a micro scalability thing for sure.
Yes.
So like,
yes.
Yeah, the task description you put, whether it be in QuickBooks or MSA or on a piece of paper or whatever it is you're putting on people's invoices, if you're using labor for everything and hand typing out in the description what you're doing, that is the opposite of scalability. That's a non-scalable thing because everything is manually typed each and every time. When you define the task and then you can repeat it within the software, then you have scaled it, right? So that step of adding, like custom tune, or rather a cob tune task into your software, if you do it once and then you can repeat it, you've scaled that step. And so then that gets into the service writer role in a shop, or basically manager, office manager or service advisor, whatever you want to call it, depending on general repair guys always call it the service advisor. But that person is essentially writing invoices for all the customers that come in, writing an invoice or an estimate, sending off estimates. That can be extremely time consuming depending on what kind of business you have. And I think that's why a lot of shops have one service advisor for every 3 technicians, because that seems to be all they can handle. Now, for us, because we only work on Evos, I could have 10 technicians with one service writer because I can do it so fast because our software has made scaling writing estimates for Evos essentially instant. Anything you could ever do on an Evo, I could do it instantly, or rather within 30 seconds of anybody asking me for anything.
But you could scale that.
It's scaled,
so you could scale all those templates and all those forms that we've done to a lot of other types of businesses. So if you work on a Subaru or a Toyota or whatever, all that stuff is scalable because the MSA or all that work that we put into all those templates could be scaled.
That's right.
Into whatever else you wanted to do.
Right. And so the role of a service advisor is largely, I think what they do is actually a scalable process. When you get to the technician level, none of that is scalable because working on the car always takes X amount of hours, no matter what. As you talked about what you like do in Peterbilt, where you kind of do your shadow boxes and like counting the steps you do and moving your toolbox closer to your car you're working on, and all these things you can do to like maximize efficiency, but it's not improving scalability. The only thing scalable about technicians, as we already mentioned, was you kind of define the role so that anybody can come in and know what to do and then just repeat it. Give them a lift, give them a toolbox, give them the tools they need, and then the service writer keeps handing them work to work on. So the role is scalable, but the work is not, right? I guess that's the best way to put it. Okay, so the book 4-Hour Work Week, I think is what it's called. That one, if anybody's read it, it's always, people like to use it as an example of like a goal to reach where you don't, as an owner, you don't have to do anything, essentially is what it is. You work 4 hours a week, send off a couple emails. You are basically distributing all the workload to other people. A fulfillment center does all the shipping for you. You have a virtual assistant to like handle all your emails and appointments and answer all the questions. So you as an owner, basically you just log in the morning on Monday, make sure all your bills are paid, make sure the bank account is going up, pay your people, and then go on vacation or live in your life doing whatever you want to do. Like that's the role or the goal, right? So is that achievable with these type of businesses? I mean, I feel like you still have, you could hire the shop management role, but at what point is there like not enough work to like pay all these tiers of people, right? So that gets into like, I was watching the news on the Starbucks thing right now, right? So Starbucks obviously is like ultimately scaled coffee shop, right? And the crazy thing to me is, how is it possible that a company so big can pay shareholders, can pay all the corporate overhead, which is probably a shit ton of it. You have regional managers, district managers, store managers, all the way down to the baristas who are now going on strike, right? So everyone says that, like, oh, those people do easy work. Like, they don't deserve $15 or $20 an hour. It's like minimum wage work. It's like, sure, I get that. But the problem I have is Starbucks needs those people to do the work, right? So they're scaling all their business model based upon the baristas, providing a service to the people. People go there to get coffee from somebody. If they wanted coffee from a vending machine, they could do that. They would not be going to Starbucks because there are vending machines, there's coffee machines. You can get coffee literally anywhere, but they still go to Starbucks because there's somebody there. So that person is adding value to the company. What value are they giving? And when you have a $7 cup of coffee, how do you determine how much money is, going to corporate overhead and, paying your shareholders, dividends or however they do it? And then you've got your management tiers. And why is local coffee shops just not able to totally dominate that industry? Why can they not do that? They don't have any of the corporate overhead. They have the same rent, the same cost of, well, they probably don't have the same cost of supplies because Starbucks beats them in volume, right? Mm-hmm. Which that never made sense to me for a lot of stuff either. Like, you still have to sell the product and somebody has to make it. And I mean, if you're just making it all in a factory, I guess that's different. But yeah, I mean, at what level of an auto shop do you need to be at to be able to afford a corporate structure? And you have to scale it somehow, right? Like, why can we not do that? Why has that not happened yet?
I think it's because it's fractured. You've got, Starbucks. You see the Starbucks name and you're like, I know Starbucks. I know I can go to Starbucks. I get the same cup of coffee every single time. I can order the one thing that I always get, no matter what city I'm in, no matter where I'm traveling. It's always the same. So, and I think with our automotive business, it's fractured. So, you go to, this shop down the street and they'll work on your car in this particular way. But then you go to another shop in another city that works on the same exact car. They work on completely differently. So it's fractured in with your processes, with your efficiencies, the way that that particular owner wants to run that business. It's the same thing that you could draw with your local coffee shop where you got just a guy that owns a shop and that's all he does, but you don't know that name. I mean, the local people know that name, but nobody else does. So
That's right.
You can't scale that because you don't have that name recognition. You don't have that warm, fuzzy feeling when I drive up to McDonald's and I know I can get the same burger every single time.
So is that the goal of like National Speed, is to get the name recognition nationwide? Like is that the goal, is name recognition? I mean, familiarity is definitely a thing. Like, people are comfortable going to it and they keep going to it whether they like it or not. Like I saw a thing that says, like, you go to a restaurant and order food that you keep ordering and you're like, I don't really like that, but you keep ordering the same thing because you're unwilling to try something different on the menu. Yeah. So is a shop that way then, I guess? Who you're comfortable with, you keep going to it. And why can you not create that brand? I mean, I kind of feel like the problem is not so much that it can't be done. It's that I feel the problem really is like the people, like getting enough specialized people under one umbrella to like work on all the different types of cars. Or like if you make a brand and call it like Performance Cars USA, and you put a shop in, every big city in the US, how do you draw people that have like tuned Hondas or tuned Corvettes or tuned Camaros or tuned, Mopar or whatever it may be? Like, how do you draw all those people into one shop without having, do you have to have a specialized person at each location for that type of car? Or do you have somebody jump back and forth? Or like you have a remote on-call Mopar tuner for nationwide, and then he remotes in and tunes cars remotely everywhere? Like, can you not scale that? It seems like we could do it. I feel like it's possible.
And I think you can do it. And I think people have tried it before. Like, if you look at some of the national chains, like even if you look at like national repair chains, it's like, I'm sure when they first started and they had their 10 franchise shops and they had really high quality and everything, but they had this diminishing return because it was a race to zero to maximize profits at all cost.
And so the techs suck because they don't pay them enough.
Yes,
right?
exactly, exactly. Which is what the Starbucks is going through now. You're not paying the baristas enough, but then when you raise the cup of coffee to where you can get the enough, you're paying $10 for a cup of coffee that should be $4.
Yeah,
and so. You got to retain that quality, and I think that's where a lot of these shops will have these struggles, because when you scale it up to where you franchise out or you have multiple locations across the state,
the technician quality drops. Right?
Yes, exactly. Or your quality control drops, and you don't have these programs in place to make sure you can ensure your quality. You can do your quality checks. You can do your to make sure that the customers are happy. The customer service is all the same.
Yeah.
And I think that like our shop here, that's where we excel. We have really good customer service, and people keep coming back because they feel good when they come here because they get the right answers. And so when you go to a shop that has some tech, you're paying a much lower wage, they're not going to give a crap if that customer comes back or not.
Right.
They just want to process them and get out.
That's why a general repair shop does not work on an Evo.
Exactly.
They will, but they're going to do it wrong 99% of the time.
Right. And then the customer will get mad and go somewhere else. So a specialty shop,
even
just
the
like
dealership sends us cars because they don't know how to do some of them, which is crazy to me that they're like master techs and they don't know what to do, right? But I guess it's because it's not an OEM part or whatever. Right. So, yeah, like it sounds like then the problem with scaling these businesses is you have to somehow scale the roles within the business. So if you're tuning a car, you need to give somebody that's good at tuning either a specific type of car or a specific ECU, or maybe they're just tuning things in general, but like you need that person to have enough work to stay with you and pay them very well, right? So the pay for the position needs to be high enough they're not willing to go and do it on their own, which I think is, ironically, everyone thinks the grass is always greener on the other side until you start a business, and then you're like, oh shit, I gotta tune 6 cars here just to pay my rent, So now it's like, and then you're really 15 cars deep because you also need insurance, and then you need your electricity bill and your phone bill and your internet bill, and then oh, you want to make something after that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then you're going to have to tune 10 more of them. So now you're 25 cars deep in 1 month tuning, and you've only made enough to pay yourself where when you're doing it out of your garage for tuning like 3 cars, right?
And then your daughter gets sick. You got to take a day off work, and then now you have to make that up somewhere. You don't get to take off for free.
Right. So, man, I mean, like this is a tough problem to solve, but like I feel like a lot of it can be done, or at least made like cookie cutter enough. This is something that there's clearly nothing in the industry for, is like cookie cutter, open a shop, everything you need to know in one spot, how to like lay out like your shop process from like checking in vehicles, getting an authorization request, taking a deposit on the parts, here's the waiver we sign, how to work on the car when you're done doing a quality control check, getting payment, final payment, delivering the car, following up a month later to make sure everything went smoothly. Like, these are processes that everybody tries to put in place. I should say not everybody. When people have been around long enough and realize that they should do a process, that's when it happens. But like, why not like immediately when you open your business, there's a template online. Here's the process to follow. You print it all out. You go to a class and you spend a week learning how to manage your business, and you just follow the process. And everything you need is all in one area. And then that is a scalable business. And maybe we should look at like doing more of this, at least with MSA, like implementing it at EvoD, but documenting how we're doing it to offer it as, how to grow how to start or grow your business with the MSA stuff.
Well, even when we had those MSA tech talks or whatever at SEMA at PRI, and we'd have people come in and they
managing your shop,
and here's your form and how to calculate your overhead and all that. And people would come in and they had no idea what their overhead was. They had no idea of why they're working 90 hours a week and still making zero profit. And so you do the formula, and it was eye-opening for a lot of people. They would be like, holy crap, look, I did not realize I was this inefficient. And then they raise their hand and say, okay, how do I become efficient?
Yeah.
That's not really scalable, but it's on the road of how to become scalable.
Right.
Is first you've got to be efficient. And then once you get to that point, then you're like, I can scale this out and I can make even more money. I can be more profitable, and now I can have a bigger vacation.
Yeah, that's a great. So maximizing efficiency is the start. You don't want to scale an inefficient process, right? So if your techs are very inefficient, none of their tools are where they need them to be, or you don't have the tools you need and they're having to go borrow them from another shop or go rent them or whatever it may be. So having the stuff you need to do it in place to do the service as quickly as possible. When you have achieved maximum efficiency, then you scale it, right? Then you hire more technicians. Whereas a lot of shops just like, oh, I got 20 cars here. I can't get them done fast enough. I'm going to hire somebody. But maybe the problem to begin with is their one guy is not able to get anything done quickly because there's 20 cars there and they're always in his way. So you have a very inefficient process, right? Mm-hmm. So this is something that we'll do another whole podcast on, just determining when you're efficient enough to hire another person or hire someone in general.
That's a great conversation, because we've learned many times how to not do it,
right,
and then how to do it properly.
Right, and that's why we've just kind of been stagnating, but stagnant with like just me and you working is like we're very efficient with what we do, but I've never felt a desire to hire another person in here until I wanted to not work on the cars anymore. But yeah, so we're very efficient with it, but it's like, and because like I don't even work 40 hours a week anymore on cars. It's like 4, maybe 3 days a week working on cars, and you're here 2-3 nights a week. So it's very minimal. I don't even think we're doing, between both of us, a single full-time person a year, which, good or bad, I mean, we still do a pretty decent amount of volume and we can pay all the bills, but it's like we either need to like hire someone in or just get this thing sold, which is what we want to do.
Right.
But okay, so
hint.
right. Okay, so like, yeah, we'll talk about the efficiency thing, I guess, in the next episode, like maximizing efficiency at the shop. But I guess I just want one last topic to cover on this. Is a performance shop something you can infinitely grow? Can you scale that huge or not? Like I guess the determining factors, how big is the market and how many cars can you actually work on, right? So in our case, we're specialized on Evos. There are not 10,000 Evos in DFW for us to work on. Like,
it's probably not 10,000 in all of the southwestern United States.
Well, I mean, all years and makes and models, there's got to be 100,000 of them at least total. But like, Yeah, when you've worked on a lot of them, or you built, like when you're selling a product to Evo people, like as an example, boost controllers. We've probably sold like thousands of boost controllers over the year, but lately we don't sell any of them because every car already has them. So how scalable is the business, and how scalable is part sales or web part sales? Eventually you're going to reach a market saturation point, right? So like you need to determine how much you can grow this thing, right? So like, does it make sense for us to have a 10,000 square foot shop with $10,000 in rent per month working on Evos only? Like, I feel like you couldn't possibly do it around here because it's not enough business of it. You have to do other types of cars. So you would have to essentially scale from one type of car, take your processes, apply it to a different type of car, hire in an expert in that type of car, and use them as the labor for it, right? Does that kind of make sense? Like,
Yeah.
Is that the direction to go?
And I think you could almost even take it a step further. You could make it a formula. You could say, based on the number of either car registrations or however you get your data, you're like, there's this many Evos, there's this many STIs, this many Z06 or whatever it is in the immediate area in a 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius. Mm-hmm. You can get the population of cars.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, well, if say 50% of those customers or owners or 40% of those owners want to modify or use that, then you can say, okay, well, that means there's 4,000 cars in my area that are potential customers. How do I reach them, and how do I make that scalable? And then you look at another car, you're like, okay, well, how many BRZs are there, or how many whatever there are, Focus RSs or whatever, and you're like, well, there's this is a population in this area. I probably shouldn't do that because there's two other guys on the street that do that, and it's probably not the best one for me to get in.
Yeah.
Which is where I was when I was doing the EcoBoost stuff. It's like, well, there's a huge population of them, but not very high population want to tune them,
right,
or they want to work on them or modify them.
And you mentioned that. I know for a fact that SEMA at one point, or probably still does, had a database where you could pull how many of a particular type of vehicle are in your area, and you could look it up.
Yeah,
it was an easy number to find.
It's a data point,
right? So you could see which markets are big enough to scale bigger, but then you also, the obvious problem is like, okay, well, if you want to work on Camaros around here, there's a bazillion of them, but there's already probably 10 shops working on them. Like, do they all tune? Like, as an example, HPP and True Street work on Mustangs, right? I remember HPP had 2 dynos working 3 months in advance, like nonstop. Like, our dyno is like used 3 times a week, maybe right now, like not very infrequently, but it's because every Evo in the area we've tuned already, right? So we've kind of like reached the market saturation. At least with Camaros, if you keep working on them, you can keep tuning new ones, right? And they still make thousands and tens of thousands of them a year. So you have a continuous growing market. So I guess that is more scalable than what we are doing. We've picked the wrong car, or because they don't make them anymore, the market has died, essentially. I feel like that's maybe the direction that's happening.
The market is shrinking.
Or shrinking, yeah.
Because everything gets crashed, and then there's less of them in the world.
Right. Okay, and so like the last 3 episodes we did in the podcast here, let's kind of discuss who is scalable and who isn't. So Matt Beenan, manufacturing. So obviously his stuff is scalable, and he's scaled it really well. Making the racks for the back of your truck bed, the phone holders and whatnot. He has scaled that. So Kevin Emmer, who you know as well, doing the EV conversions on hot rod, bodies essentially. I feel like it's a scalable business, but I feel like the way he's done it is not, right? So
hasn't got to that point yet.
Hasn't gotten to the point yet. So he's doing the actual installs himself still. So while that is, like we just discussed, if you make the process defined enough, you could maybe scale it, but it's still very limited by the technicians. Whereas if he just made the kits, he could sell them to every restoration shop in America or the world that wants to put an EV in a older car. So I feel like he's halfway there, or on the direction of doing that. And then the last episode was Adam McCreary, AFR AutoWorks. He is an install shop like us. I'm as we discussed in the podcast, is definitely made it efficient. He's making the shop efficient and profitable by understanding the dollar per hour that he's generating, the dollar per hour that he needs to generate to stay profitable, and then maximizing that step. So he has essentially made it as efficient as possible to make it scalable. So his next step then is to hire people in when he has enough demand, or he has to do the next step of starting another location somewhere, right? So when you have the processes so good that you know it works, then you can take it, cut and paste it into a different region or take on a different type of car. So like that's like I guess the goal, right? So that's
how you scaled it.
The direction you take. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so let's me and you our homework is we need to go through the shop and we need to figure out what we can scale, and let's do it. Let's scale something or make something within the process that we're doing repeatable, or maybe let's just improve the efficiency on working on the cars enough where we can take on another type of car. Like I've really wanted to do Teslas, but I feel like that is one that not enough people modify them. There's an absolute shit ton of them around here, but I don't think hardly anybody modifies them. Alignments, tint, clear bras, and a few little gadgets on the inside of the car, I think is the extent of that. I don't know how much of a business you can run off that, but I don't know. Maybe it's bigger than Evos. So let's find out. Everyone, we really want to get your feedback on this. So this is a discussion. Me and Richard discussed the topics or the topic at hand, but let us know what you think. If you have anything else you want to share or that we should talk about in the next episode where me and Richard discuss this stuff, just let us know. Okay, and we obviously know how to connect with you and the company. It's just evodynamics.com. And then myshopassist.com is our other company. So, Richard, thanks for taking the time to talk with us, and we will obviously now be seeing you in future episodes once we get our little studio set up.
Can't wait. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Do It for a Living. You can find out more about this guest, this show, and even details about what we just talked about at our website, doitforaliving.net. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/doitforaliving and tell us who you want to hear from. And most importantly, subscribe to the podcast. Click subscribe. Do it now. Seriously. I'll wait while you grab your phone. Open up the podcast app, tap the subscribe button. When you subscribe, you help us gain momentum and attract more high-level guests. Thanks for listening, and good luck.